Welcome. Today we're reading the chapter Struck by Fate of the novel Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle. Last time, Tarzan of the Apes intervened in a safari led by the arrogant Stimble, commanding him and his men to respect the jungle and avoid unnecessary killing. After a violent storm, Tarzan confronts Stimble, who contemplates killing him but is thwarted by Bolgani the gorilla, and ultimately Tarzan decides to let Stimble go, warning him about the dangers of the jungle. Left alone, Stimble's bluster quickly fades when he realizes he has been deserted by his men and soon finds himself at the mercy of a lion, resulting in a night of terror as he clings to safety in a tree.
The Cross. The storm that had overtaken Stimble's safari wrought even greater havoc with the plans of Jim Blake, altering in the instant of a single blinding flash of lightning the course of his entire life. Accompanied by a single black, who carried his camera and an extra rifle, Blake had struck out from the direct route of his safari in search of lion pictures, there being every indication that the great carnivores might be found in abundance in the district through which they were passing. It was his intention to parallel the route of his main body and rejoin it in camp in the afternoon. The boy who accompanied him was intelligent and resourceful. The direction and speed of the marching safari were mutually agreed upon, and the responsibility for bringing Blake into camp safely was left entirely to the Negro. Having every confidence in the boy, Blake gave no heed to either time or direction, devoting all his energies to the fascinating occupation of searching for photographic studies. Shortly after leaving the safari, Blake and his companion encountered a herd of 7 or 8 lions, which included a magnificent old male, an old lioness, and 5 or 6 young, ranging from half to full grown. At sight of Blake and his companion, the lions took off leisurely through rather open forest, and the men followed, awaiting patiently the happy coincidence of time, light, and grouping that would give the white man such a picture as he desired. In the mind of the black man was pictured the route of the safari and its relation to the meanderings of the quarry. He knew how far and in what directions he and his companion were being led from their destination. To have returned to the trail of the safari would have been a simple matter to him. But Blake, depending entirely upon the black, gave no heed either to time or direction. For 2 hours they clung doggedly to the spoor, encouraged by occasional glimpses of now one, now several members of the regal group, but never was the opportunity afforded for a successful shot. Then the sky became rapidly overcast by black clouds, and a few moments later the storm broke in all the terrific fury that only an equatorial storm can achieve, and an instant later, amidst the deafening roar of thunder and a blinding flash of lightning, utter disaster engulfed James Hunter Blake. How long he lay, stunned by the shock of the bolt that had struck but a few feet from him, he did not know. When he opened his eyes, the storm had passed, and the sun was shining brightly through the leafy canopy of the forest. Still dazed, uncomprehending the cause or extent of the catastrophe, he raised himself slowly upon an elbow and looked about him. One of the first sights that met his eyes aided materially in the rapid recovery of his senses. Less than 100 feet from him stood a group of lions, 7 of them, solemnly regarding him. The characteristics of individual lions differ as greatly from those of their fellows as do the characteristics of individuals of the human race, and, even as a human being, a lion may have his moods as well as his personal idiosyncrasies. These lions that gravely inspected the man-thing had been spared any considerable experience with the human species. They had seen but few men. They had never been hunted. They were well fed. Blake had done nothing greatly to upset their easily irritated nervous systems. Fortunately for him, they were merely curious. But Blake did not know all this. He knew only that 7 lions were standing within 100 feet of him, that they were not in a cage, and that while he had pursued them to obtain photographs, the thing that he most desired at the moment was not his camera but his rifle. Stealthily, that he might not annoy them, he looked about him for the weapon. To his consternation, it was nowhere in sight, nor was his gun-bearer with the extra rifle. Where could the boy be? Doubtless, frightened by the lions, he had decamped. 20 feet away was a most inviting tree. Blake wondered if the lions would charge the moment that he rose to his feet. He tried to remember all that he had heard about lions, and he did recall one fact that applies with almost axiomatic verity to all dangerous animals. If you run from them, they will pursue you. To reach the tree, it would be necessary to walk almost directly toward the lions. Blake was in a quandary, and then one of the younger lions moved a few steps nearer. That settled the matter as far as Blake was concerned, for the closer the lions came, the shorter his chance of gaining the tree ahead of them, in the event that they elected to prevent. In the midst of a tremendous forest, entirely surrounded by trees, nature had chosen to strike him down almost in the center of a natural clearing. There was a good tree 100 feet away, and on the opposite side of the clearing from the lions. Blake stole a longing glance at it and then achieved some rapid mental calculations. If he ran for the farther tree, the lions would have to cover 200 feet while he was covering 100, while if he chose the nearer tree, they must come 80 feet while he was going 20. There seemed, therefore, no doubt as to the greater desirability of the nearer tree, which ruled favourite by odds of 2 to 1. Against it, however, loomed the mental hazard that running straight into the face of 7 lions involved. Jim Blake was sincerely, genuinely, and honestly scared, but unless the lions were psychoanalysts, they would never have dreamed the truth as he started nonchalantly and slowly toward them, and the tree. The most difficult feat that he had ever accomplished lay in making his legs behave themselves. They wanted to run. So did his feet and his heart and his brain. Only his will held them in leash. Those were tense moments for Jim Blake. The first half-dozen steps he took, with 7 great lions watching his approach. He saw that they were becoming nervous. The lioness moved uneasily. The old male growled. A younger male, he who had started forward, lashed his sides with his tail, flattened his head, bared his fangs and stealthily approached. Blake was almost at the tree when something happened. He never knew what the cause, but inexplicably the lioness turned and bounded away, voicing a low whine, and after her went the other 6. The man leaned against the bole of the tree and fanned himself with his helmet. "Phew!" he breathed. "I hope the next lion I see is in the Central Park Zoo." But even lions were forgotten in the developments that the next few moments revealed. After repeated shouts for the black boy had brought no response, and Blake had determined that he must set out in search of him. Nor did he have far to go. On the backtrack, just inside the clearing, Blake found a few remnants of charred flesh and a blackened and half-molten rifle barrel. Of the camera, not a vestige remained. The bolt that had bowled Blake over must have squarely struck his gun-bearer, killing him instantly, exploding all the ammunition, destroying the camera and ruining the rifle that he had carried. But what had become of the rifle that had been in Blake's hands? The man searched in all directions, but could not find it, and was finally forced to the conclusion that its disappearance could be attributed only to one of those freakish tricks which severe electrical storms so often play upon helpless and futile humanity. Frankly aware that he was lost, and had not the faintest conception of the direction in which lay the proposed camp of his safari, Blake started blindly off on what he devoutly hoped would prove the right route. It was not. His safari was moving northeast. Blake headed north. For 2 days he trudged on through dense forest, sleeping at night among the branches of trees. Once his fitful slumbers were disturbed by the swaying of a branch against which he was braced. As he awoke, he felt it sag as to the weight of some large animal. He looked and saw 2 fiery eyes gleaming in the dark. Blake knew it to be a leopard as he drew his automatic and fired point blank. With a hideous scream, the great cat sprang or fell to the ground. Blake never knew if he hit it. It did not return, and there were no signs of it in the morning. He found food and water in abundance, and upon the morning of the 3rd day he emerged from the forest at the foot of a range of lofty mountains, and for the first time in weeks reveled in an unobstructed view of the blue sky, and saw the horizon again and all that lay between himself and it. He had not realized that he had been depressed by the darkness and the crowding pressure of the trees, but now he experienced all the spiritual buoyancy of a released convict, long immured from freedom and the light of day. Rescue was no longer problematical, merely a matter of time. He wanted to sing and shout, but he conserved his energies and started toward the mountains. There had been no native villages in the forest, and so, he reasoned, as there must be native villages in a well-watered country stocked with game, he would find them upon the mountain slopes. Topping a rise, he saw below him the mouth of a canyon in the bed, of which ran a small stream. A village would be built on water. If he followed the water, he would come to the village. Quite easy. He descended to the stream, where he was deeply gratified to find that a well-worn path paralleled it. Encouraged by the belief that he would soon encounter natives, and believing that he would have no difficulty in enlisting their services in aiding him to relocate his safari, Blake followed the path upward into the canyon. He had covered something like 3 miles without having discovered any sign of habitation when, at a turn in the path, he found himself at the foot of a great white cross of enormous proportions. Hewn from limestone, it stood directly in the center of the trail and towered above him fully 60 feet. Checked and weather-worn, it gave an impression of great antiquity, which was further borne out by the remains of an almost obliterated inscription upon the face of its massive base. Blake examined the carved letters, but could not decipher their message. The characters appeared of early English origin, but he dismissed such a possibility as too ridiculous to entertain. He knew that he could not be far from the southern boundary of Abyssinia, and that the Abyssinians are Christians. Thus he explained the presence of the cross, but he could not explain the suggestion of sinister menace that this lonely, ancient symbol of the crucifix held for him. Why was it? What was it? Standing there, tongueless, hoary with age, it seemed to call upon him to stop, to venture not beyond it into the unknown. It warned him back, but not seemingly out of a spirit of kindliness and protection, but rather with arrogance and hate. With a laugh, Blake threw off the mood that had seized him and went on. But as he passed the great white monolith, he crossed himself. Though he was not a Catholic, he wondered what had impelled him to the unfamiliar act, but he could no more explain it than he could the strange and uncanny suggestion of power and personality that seemed to surround the crumbling cross. Another turn in the path and the trail narrowed, where it passed between two huge boulders that might have fallen from the clifftop towering far above. Cliffs closed in closely now in front and upon two sides. Apparently he was close to the canyon's head, and yet there was no slightest indication of a village. Yet where did the trail lead? It had an end and a purpose. He would discover the former, and if possible, the latter. Still under the depressing influence of the cross, Blake passed between the two boulders, and the instant that he had passed them, a man stepped out behind him and another in front. They were Negroes, stalwart, fine-featured fellows, and in themselves nothing to arouse wonder or surprise. Blake had expected to meet Negroes in Africa, but not Negroes wearing elaborately decorated leathern jerkins, upon the breasts of which red crosses were emblazoned, close-fitting nether garments and sandals held by duskin thongs, cross-gartered halfway to their knees. Not Negroes wearing close-fitting bassinets of leopard skin that fitted their heads closely and reached to below their ears. Not Negroes armed with two-handed broadswords and elaborately tipped pikes. Blake was acutely aware of the pike tips, as there was one pressing against his belly, and another in the small of his back. "Who be ye?" demanded the Negro that faced Blake. Had the man addressed him in Greek, Blake would have been no more surprised than he was by the incongruity of this archaic form of speech, falling from the lips of a 20th century Central African black. He was too dumbfounded for an instant to reply. "Doubtless the fellow be a Saracen, Paul," said the black behind Blake, "and understands not what thou sayest, a spy perchance." "Nay, Peter Wiggs, as my name be Paul Bodkin, he be no infidel. That I know of mine own good eyes. Whatsoe'er he be, it is for ye to fetch him before the captain of the gate, who will question him, Paul Bodkin. Natheless there be no hurt in questioning him first, and he will answer." "Stop thy tongue and take him to the captain," said Peter. "I will abide here, and guard the way until thou returnest." Paul stepped aside and motioned for Blake to precede him. Then he fell in behind, and the American did not need to glance back to know that the ornate tip of the pike was ever threateningly ready. The way lay plain before him, and Blake followed the trail toward the cliffs, where there presently appeared the black mouth of a tunnel leading straight into the rocky escarpment. Leaning against the sides of a niche just within the entrance were several torches made of reeds or twigs, bound tightly together and dipped in pitch. One of these Paul Bodkin selected, took some tinder from a metal box he carried in a pouch at his side, struck a spark to it with flint and steel, and having thus ignited the tinder and lighted the torch, he pushed Blake on again with the tip of his pike, and the two entered the tunnel, which the American found to be narrow and winding, well suited to defense. Its floor was worn smooth, until the stones of which it was composed shone polished in the flaring of the torch. The sides and roof were black, with the soot of countless thousands, perhaps, of torch-lighted passages along this strange way that led to what?
Did you enjoy today's chapter of Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle? Why not subscribe and ring the bell?